I've worn a little get up today in honor of the movie review we're doing, which is The Banshees of Inisherin. It's a very popular movie that you probably haven't heard of. The Banshees of Inisherin is the story of friendship and the consequences of depression set on an island off the coast of Ireland in the 1920s. This is exactly what a ballad looks like. It is dark, morose, quirky, a bit gory, weaving a tale of truth into a tune that will haunt you after. So, Banshees of Inisherin, there's a lot of things going on around it as far as what critics are saying the movie is about. Many are drawing the correlation between what Ireland was going through at the time with the famine and then, of course, with the Irish War for Independence. But I see a little bit something different. That sentence doesn't make any sense, but I see something different in the story, and I knew nothing about this film at all going into it. Other than I loved the cast, and I love Irish tales, Celtic anything, and British drama, so it just was on the list to watch. It's got a great cast, Colin Farrell, which, can we acknowledge how amazing he's become? Like, in my day when I was young, he was a heartthrob, but he was always like the bad boy kind of thing. And all the movies he was in were just, they were kind of trash. And he was not considered to be a very serious actor at all until recently. And I really started paying attention to him after seeing him in The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, another film you've probably never heard of. But his whole role in that film and the way he executed it, I was like, wow, okay, he's an actor. Like, he's a really good actor, and I started paying more attention to him. But you might recognize him from In Bruges. He's briefly in the Harry Potter franchise as Grindelwald, narrow escape for him, and as the Penguin in the new Darkest of Dark Batmans. And we have another familiar face from the HP franchise. We have Brendan Gleeson. He has a very long career, very well-established actor, but we might know him best as Mad Eye Moody, or you, whatever. Anyways. And then we have a bunch of other great cast members that are being honored in many awards recently, and this film is making quite a few splashes in the awards circuit, but I'm going to be talking about how it relates to depression and why I think it's one of the best movies about depression. So Colin Farrell plays the character of Padraig, and Brendan Gleeson plays the character of Colm. And then we also have Padraig's sister, Siobhan, which, if I've ever been represented in mannerisms and personality in a character or film, I think Siobhan is the closest I've seen. Not that I'm like constantly looking for representation. I'm not. That's not. I can relate to so many different characters. I mean, I thought I was John Wayne when I was a kid, so it doesn't matter what they look like or sound like or anything. But I really related to her character and the way she responded and reacted to everybody. Really enjoyed that. Another character in the story is young Dominic, who you really feel a lot of pity for. So let me give you a little brief overview as briefly as I can about the setting of the story and like what's really going on, and then we're going to talk about how it relates to depression. So this small island has a singular pub, a tight community that know something is wrong with Padraig and Colm, because these guys meet every day for a pint at 2:00, and one day Padraig shows up and Colm isn't there, and Colm doesn't like him anymore. He says he doesn't want to hang out with him anymore, and Padraig is very confused by this. Everyone urges them to patch their relationship up, including Padraig's sister Siobhan, but I didn't really know where the story was going at this point. I thought it was like a drama maybe, but I had a clue that this was going to be far more interesting than first believed because of the score. Music tells you a lot, and sometimes in modern film we don't seem to pay enough attention to it. We've got a lot of shows and films coming out with really forgettable themes, but the music in this film was dropping these subtle hints that something strange or devious was going to happen next. And music is such a huge part of the setting of a scene and holding your attention The score does a great job from the get-go, letting you know that something is off. It's dissonant, it's minor, and it's ominous. And you know that something is going to be coming next in this story. It was like, am I watching a murder show, a horror fantasy, maybe? You've got these beautiful, gorgeous backdrops of this Irish countryside and cottages and splashes of color. And you've got an ominous old lady that comes in who's, she's kind of bringing this element. She knows what other people don't. And you're thinking, is this going to get into like the fantasy realm? What's happening here? So it has a unique Irish flair to it. So how is the show about depression? So Colin breaks off his friendship with the village nice guy, Padraig, Colin Farrell, due to being bored with the conversation and finding Padraig to be blabbery, safe, boring, and uninteresting. Colin is in his old age and truly wants to do something with his life by composing and writing music and expressing himself that way, leaving behind a legacy. So he's older, he feels like he's just wasting his time with Padraig, and he's more of a contemplative thinker and all this sort of thing. And so he just says Padraig doesn't want to talk to him anymore. He's done. This blows Padraig's mind, knowing that he's a good conversationalist. He's always chatting. Right away, we get a feeling for these characters, the deep mind of Colm, a brooding artist seeking to change the world through their art and self-importance, not thinking the everyday mundane is worthwhile, which happens a lot to artists. We find the everyday things that we go through and struggle with very mundane. And we're often too focused on our own self-importance and wanting to change the world. And then there is dear Padraig, who just is content as a clam to be where he is with who he is, doing his everyday routine. And he's one of those people that doesn't see a cloudy day. Annoying, granted, but, he's a people pleaser. Can't take no for an answer. But he means well the entire time. He's like pushing you off the cliff of insanity, which I feel like we all know somebody like that. And this is exactly what happens, pushing people off the cliff, because Padraig's annoying persistence to mend his friendship with Colm drives Colm to desperate attempts to keep him from talking to him again. Side note, yes, I have a script. I'm trying to be brief. Now, this is a small village mind, so, we've got lots of drama involved here. A little dumb, but Colm threatens to cut off a finger every time Padraig talks to him. Colm's a musician. He plays the fiddle and composes. This is a very rude threat to be making. So everyone in the village, including Padraig's sister, encourages him not to talk to Colm, just leave him alone, and don't let the guy chop off any of his fingers. But one night, in a drunken stupor, commonplace enough, Padraig stands up for himself and yells at Colm. He then apologizes the next day, and Colm cuts a finger off and throws it at Padraig's house. So, maybe I'm giving away a lot of spoilers here, but I'm trying to paint a different picture of the film, and you can go and watch it. And the performances are so incredible. There's no way my roughshod summary of the film is really going to spoil it for you, because it's really quite fascinating how they pull this off. So after this is when I finally figured out what was going on in this story. Colm is depressed. He's overlooking Padraig's friendship and punishing Padraig for caring because Colm is dealing with a crisis in his own life. That crisis is not measuring up. Colm's outburst of cutting off a finger is a sign of Colm exercising his authority over Padraig and to bring more pity on himself. Now, it's true Colm wants Padraig to man up, stand up for himself, and not be so nice, but at what cost? Now, let's talk about poor Dominic, who I've mentioned before, a young man trapped on this island who has an abusive father, no girl, and drinks too much. Sounds like about every Irishman I know. Just kidding. He and Padraig start hanging out after Colm and Padraig's falling out, but the poor boy is so lost he makes a nuisance of himself. This doesn't really bother Padraig's sunny personality, but he's so focused on his relationship with Colm that he doesn't see Dominic is reaching out to someone, anyone, to listen to him. Siobhan, who loves her brother, tends the farm and stays well informed. She's a very unique character. She's reading a lot. She gets a job at a library, all this kind of stuff. But, you know, she takes care of Patrick until she sees an opportunity to leave the drama and the gossip of the Isle. And more on that in a minute. But it just paints this unique picture of family, loneliness, and a small community, which I can relate to. Another thing that I can relate to is Patrick's love of animals. So he has a host of animals, some cows, a horse, and a donkey named Jenny, and they've got a small farm. They depend on the cow's milk, so he takes very good care of his cattle. Now, for those of you that watch the film and think, oh, that's cute, it's deeper than that. Let me tell you, even though these animals serve a purpose on the farm, they're closer to Patrick than anyone else. There is so much mutual trust between a farmer or an agricultural rural person and their animals. So for Patrick, there's so much mutual trust between him and his plow horse and his pet donkey. Y'all just don't even know how intense it is when you're dependent on each other for survival. And we get that picture, and Colin Farrell does such a great job. But the film does a great job of capturing this dynamic. So kudos to that. That's not often that I can compliment anything or any way that anybody in film or Hollywood or anywhere else around portray rural people. Usually they get it quite wrong. But anyways, Colin brings on other friends, taunting Patrick with his inferiority, and drives Patrick from being the nice guy to someone mean. And their feud becomes more than a spat and starts doing some full-on damage. Patrick becomes angry, morose, he starts lying to people, and betraying the trust of even poor Dominic. Dominic, being uncouth and unloved, professes his love to Siobhan, who nicely and very respectfully turns him down, but the poor boy is lost again. Now, another sign that I really like Siobhan is because of the way she handles Dominic. First she tells him her mind and speaks, directly to him and be like, hey, you need to get your act together. But when Dominic comes to Siobhan and basically confesses his love to her, she doesn't say, oh, shut up, you're such an idiot, like most women would today. She just says, no, that's not going to work. I'm many decades older than you, and no. But it's very kindly done. But it does unmoor the boy again, and he's not doing so good. Meanwhile, Patrick has broken his own rules for life and become someone he's not. Colin continues to cut off more fingers, leaving him a stub on his left hand. And when Colin throws his remaining fingers at the door of Patrick's house, Patrick's pet donkey, Jenny, chokes to death on the fingers, leaving Patrick in even more grief. And at the same time, Siobhan has put up boundaries with this whole mess and left the island to the mainland for a new job. So I know this is kind of like dark humor comedy stuff, but I love this kind of thing. I love dark comedy, and you'll see that in some other shows that I'll be talking about. But it seems ridiculous, this kind of gruesome thing that's happening between these men, but it's so deep and so well done that you can't laugh. Even though me retelling it to you is kind of like, what? Cutting off fingers? This is ridiculous. Because of, the film starts getting quite heavy and dark, and Dominic unfortunately drowns himself, and now Colin is bleeding in the pub composing his music, and Patrick takes his revenge by burning Colin's house but saving his dog. And so by the end of the film, it's, we get close to the end of the film, and these men have just kind of gone at each other, holding to their convictions but also changing a lot at the same time. Colin said, I'm going to chop my fingers off, and he does it, but he loses his ability to play music. and Patrick continues to be nice to him and to be a friend, but also starts a lot of drama in other places and misses out on the opportunity to comfort Dominic, which I think is so sad. I won't tell you the ending of the film, so at least I'll leave some guesswork there. This is how it paints the picture of depression. And as someone who struggled with depression, very intense and severe depression, I feel like I can speak to this. So, Colin drags Patrick down with him into pity, into guilt, into self-loathing, and changes his friend for the worst. His friend, Patrick, fights against the darkness until he's overcome, becoming depressed as well. Colum's self-mutilation is to punish the joy in Patrick and to level the playing field, because Colum isn't finding any joy. And Patrick does in the everyday, but Colum is not. And Colum wants his friend, Patrick, to be the same as him. See, if Colum only knew how much he impacted not only Patrick's life and his own life, but the community by chatting with Patrick, he could see that he would leave behind a legacy that would be greater than any piece of music. Making Patrick happy kept Dominic alive in a lot of ways and affected so many in the village, others in the village for good. And if Patrick would have caught on to boundaries sooner, he could have facilitated Colum's need to write his opus rather than unwittingly destroy the dream and driving his sister away, although Siobhan's decision to leave was a good one. But see, this is what happens when we get depressed. It affects more than ourselves, but our entire community. And if you have a spouse or a close friend, you can seek pain and attention through that pain so much that you end up bringing them into the dark place with you, becoming an emotional black hole. Now, you might say, I don't want to feel bad for being depressed. That's just going to make it worse. But that right there is what I want to point out. That's the key. I am someone who has struggled with suicidal, you ought to know what I mean, depression. And it's a battle every day to keep going. But there is no one who can make you feel more depressed, especially if they are just trying to help you. Depression is an evil parasite that latches onto you, and you have to fight it every day of your life. And to bring others into that dark cloud is so selfish and only going to make things worse. At first, it feels good to know that others are suffering like you or understand your pain or fall into the victimhood that you're in with your own depression. Kind of level the playing field because you can't understand their joy. But then you create another monster and kind of do this chain effect. Patrick now knows the pain of being depressed and will have to fight that now. But he doesn't let it completely consume him, because in the end, he takes a step back into the light. I found this a moving film about depression and friendship, but it's also quirky, very Irish, dramatic, and a bit gory, but just like a good old Celtic ballad. It's a creatively courageous piece. And even though there is a priest in the story that does point out that Colum is depressed and asks him what he's going to do about it, and Colum just says he's going to shove it down and do nothing. And that, dear listeners, is exactly how darkness wins the day. And you've got to get up and fight. One last rant. Christ can change all of this. And if he could be represented in a film like this, it would make the journey to the light so much more powerful. We as the human race get so fixated on darkness and pain that that's Clancy moaning. She's tired. But we get so fixated on darkness and pain that we forget that coming into the light is so glorious and amazing. And I just enjoyed this film because it painted the picture of what it's like to feel depressed and what it's like to drag other people into that depression. And like I said, I've battled with this. I know this, and the Lord has helped me see the light and given me the strength in my mind and in my heart to fight it every day, to have that victory, to have that love, and to have that everyday joy. And it's not easy to go through it. And I feel for Colum and Patrick, but it was a really great depiction. And so if you like broody dramas with quirkiness and a little bit of gore, there's a little bit of language, but not too much, but it's an overall clean film, then watch Banshees of Inisherin. I definitely enjoyed it. And one last thing, I keep on saying one last, but how do I fight depression? How do I battle it? Well, it's not just about praying and reading my Bible and, being around positive people and all that kind of thing. It's about putting on some armor, some tough, feckin' armor. It's the armor of God, the helmet of salvation, which is what I pray over myself every day and my family. The helmet of salvation, to know in my mind that I am saved through the sacrifice of Christ. See, the mind is one of the biggest battlegrounds, and especially today, we're so trapped in our own little world, talking to each other through screens, and our minds get so afflicted, and our eyes are windows into the soul, and everything that we consume ends up coming out of us. And it's so important to know that in your mind, that helmet can protect your mind, that you are saved through Christ if you are. And that is something that I have got to put on every day, because Satan knows exactly, and depression, the spirit of depression, knows exactly where to hit my buttons in my brain. Next thing I put on is the breastplate of righteousness. So you've got to know in your heart that you are in a right and good place. And that takes a lot of searching, a lot of soul searching and introspection. And it's a process that never ends. But getting your heart right and contrite and pietous, only the pietous man will pass. And that's exactly what you've got to do, is put on that breastplate. And the breastplate protects your heart, protects the knowledge that you are in the right. And then the other thing is the belt of truth. A good old belt. I got a belt. A good old belt of truth, because truth will hold you together. It's going to hold that place of rightness in your heart. And the next piece of armor, the feet shod with the gospel of peace, and that belt of truth. It's not your truth. It's not somebody else's truth. It's not all this subjective BS. It's truth. It's the truth in knowing what is right and what is wrong. And that truth can be found through the personage of Jesus, because he says, I am the way, the truth, and the light. So you got to put on your belt of truth to hold you together, because in the days ahead, dear friends, and in the days today, we need a lot of holding together. The next thing, feet shod with the gospel of peace. Now, it's so important that we get out content that is peaceful. And I'm not going to get up here and whine and complain about all the negative things going on in the world. I know that that's usually what's going to get views and subscribers, is to jump on the bandwagon of argumentation. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be trying to spread the gospel of peace. Tell you more about that peace, but it's found through Christ, man. I'm telling you. And then finally, and last but definitely not least, is the sword of the Spirit. And that's why this is called Never Drop Your Sword, because the sword symbolizes an offense, yes, and a weapon, but it also symbolizes the Spirit of God, which goes before you mightily. And you never really have to use it, because God's got your back, and he's got the front too. And when you march forth into battle, ready to fight the darkness, that spirit of truth of the scriptures is going to lead you on. And that's exactly what I encourage you to check out and look into, is that armor of God if you struggle with depression. And if you've got other tricks for handling your depression and getting through all of that, drop them in the comments below. This is a channel for the gospel of peace, man. I'm going to be talking about good things, not bad. So if you're into that, please like, share, and subscribe. We got more coming. And never drop your sword. Stay courageous, friends.